Now you guys are probably really comfortable when we're talking about the square root of a number. So let's say I'm talking about the square root of 4. You know that as being 2 because it's what number times itself twice would be that. Now technically we should be writing that square root of 4 with a 2 in there. Because what that 2 means is that that's how many times a number times itself will give you 4. So 4 equals 2 times 2. So since 2 is twice, it would be 4, just like 9 is 3 times 3. And so the square root of 9 is going to be 3 because you multiply by 3 twice. Now what we're going to look at is what if we change that number there in the little divot? What if we said it was a different number? What would our answer be? So for example, the cubed root of 8 means what number times itself 3 times gives you 8, and that would be 2, because 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. There are 3 of them, and so the answer is going to be 2. Likewise, the fourth root of 81 is 3, because 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 is 81, or 3 to the fourth is 81. And so that 4 is saying what number times itself that many times will give you that. So another way we can write that, we write it with the nth root inside of there. Otherwise, we can use it as exponents. Now, this is a new exponent. You're used to whole numbers, you're used to negatives, but now we're going to throw in a fraction. And so what happens is when you have that number on the bottom, that's the same thing as saying what root you're talking about. So I could rewrite the square root of x as x to the 1/2. Okay, so it means the exact same thing. Or I could rewrite the fourth root of 81 as 81 to the 1/4. So if we look here, you have some technical things to worry about. If n is odd, then it's just the same thing that you're used to. But what could happen is if n is even, okay, so that number there is an even number, then you have to worry about what's inside. See if it's an even number. So we've talked before that when we do the square root of 4, it's actually plus or minus 2, because a positive 2 times a positive 2 gives you 4, and a negative 2 times a negative 2 gives you 4. So what's happening is, because you have an even number of negatives, whenever you have an even number of negatives, they cancel out. So you have to worry, because if that number's even, you're saying we could have an even number of negatives in there that gives me a positive a. So I have to worry about that. So if a is a whole number, or a positive number, sorry, then we're going to have to do plus or minus the answer, just like we did right here. If a is 0, then the answer is just 0, because the only way to get 0 is to have 0 in there. And if a is negative, then we have complex, just like we did up here. Okay, so this is actually nothing new. It's the same thing as square roots, only you could also have a 4 in there, or you could have an 8 in there, or a 10. What is new is up here, actually, the easy thing, because I could have the cubed root of negative 8, and instead of saying that I get I, this is actually going to be negative 2. Because if you have negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2, you get a positive or a negative 8, which is very possible to happen. So your answer would just be negative 2. So you have to really be aware of what root are you looking at. What is your n value? Is it positive or negative? So it's time to do some examples, then maybe you'll feel a little more comfortable with this. Alright, so the cubed root of negative 125. So we've got a negative there. Now here's the idea. Negative 5 times negative 5 times negative 5 is a negative 125. Therefore, the cubed root of negative 125 is negative 5. So I first am looking at what times itself 3 times will give me 125, and then I look at the negative and see if that's possible. So then I have the fourth root of 16. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 gives me 16. So this is going to be a plus or minus 2. Because remember, if all of these were negative, they would all cancel out to give me a positive 16. So I'm going to have both of those answers. All right, my next one, I have the fifth root of negative 32. 2 to the fifth is 32. Therefore, my fifth root is going to be negative 2. The negative is okay because we have an odd number. The cubed root of 64, well, 4 to the third is 64. So then the cubed root is going to be 4. Now I don't have to do a plus or minus here because if 4 was negative, I would have a negative 64 in there. But since 64 is positive, it's going to definitely be a positive 4. All right, the fourth root of 625, 5 to the fourth is 625. So this is going to be plus or minus 5. Again, I do have to worry about there being negatives, because if there were negatives, then they would all cancel out because of the 4. There's 4 negatives, and they would cancel out to be positive. And then we have the cubed root of negative 27. That would be negative 3, because 3 to the third is 27, and we got the negative with an odd, so we have to keep the negative there. But of course, things get a little bit more complicated. So here is what's happening. So we talked about all these negative exponents. What if, we talked about these fraction exponents. So you got an n on bottom, so that's the nth root. But what if there's a number up there, not just a 1? Well, if you remember, if you have an exponent to another exponent, you multiply those exponents. So if I had 1 over n to the mth, I would multiply these. Now that m is m over 1. So 1 times m is m, and n times 1 is n. So basically what we're looking at doing is we're trying to figure out, okay, the nth root, okay, that n on the bottom is giving me the nth root. So the n on the bottom is giving me the nth root, and then I'm still raising it to the m power. For example, if I look at this 9 to the 3/2 down here, I am looking at, with the 2 there, I'm looking at the square root of 9. What's 9 to the 1/2? But I still have a 3 on top, so once I'm done with that, I'm going to figure out what is that to the 3rd power. So the square root of 9, I'll do what's inside here first. The square root of 9 is 3, and then my exponent is 3, so 3 to the 3rd is 27. So the other part of this is, what if you had a negative number? So if you look at this one, we have a negative number right there. It's still going to be the same concept of it's still going to be the nth root, it's still going to be to the m, but you'll notice what happened is it moved down to the bottom. Remember, negative exponents move things down to the bottom, and we'll leave a 1 on top. And so whatever this would have been without the negative, that's going to be on the bottom now with the 1 on top. And so if we look at another example here, this would be 32 to the negative 2/5. I'm still looking at 32 to the 1/5, so the 5th root of 32, that's taking care of that bottom. Now the top is still there, the negative 2. So the 5th root of 32 is 2, and it's still to the negative 2. Now 2 to the 2nd, if I ignore the negative, 2 to the 2nd is 4, but with that negative I need to move that to the bottom, and I'll put a 1 on top, so my answer would be 1/4. So some more examples for that. 32 to the 2/5. I think I just did that, negative 2/5. We just did that. Let's move on to the next one. So 64 to the negative 2/3. So the negative means everything's going to go down to the bottom. It's going to be 64 to the 1/3. So I'm looking at the cubed root of 64, and then I'll raise it to the 2nd power. So it'll be 1 over 64 to 1/3. Well, that would be the cubed root of 64 is 4 to the 2nd power, so we get 1 over 16. Okay, the next one, 49 to the 3/2. We're looking at 49 to the 1/2, so I'm ignoring the top number, I'm just using the bottom, the square root part, and then that's to the 3rd power. So the square root of 49 is 7, and then to the 3rd power, I think it's 343, but I could be wrong on that one. All right, you can check that out. And then we have 16 to the negative 3/4. So let's see here. It's going to move to the bottom because of the negative. I'm going to have the 1/4 first. You always want to do the root first. Do that bottom number first because it's going to make it smaller and make your numbers more workable. And then to the 3rd. Now the 4th root of 16 is 2 to the 3rd. Is 8. 2 to the 3rd is 8, so my answer would be 1/8, the exponent that I could use.